To begin with, I'm going to invite Poppy up here from the International Action Center, and he's going to give us a report back from the Venezuelan consulate.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for joining us here today. It's a very important meeting, probably the most important meeting we've had since the action on Wall Street. So a quick update, if anyone hasn't heard yet. On Monday, the Venezuelan defectors, a group of Venezuelan defectors, at the behest of what we can assume is the State Department, illegally occupied the consulate, a Venezuelan consulate that had been was no longer operational. The Venezuelan government had ceased operations out of that building for a few months prior to that. So they basically broke into an empty building, I would say, did significant property destruction to the rooms and surrounding areas, and then documented it on the internet as somehow it being evidence that the socialist government is that me or is that?
I don't know.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, I see. It's
Okay, no problem. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, they basically had taken control of the Venezuelan consulate, and they were planning, from what we've heard, they were planning to host some sort of event or party to celebrate that they had successfully occupied the consulate. So we got news of this from at about 6 o'clock on Monday, 5:45 on Monday. We got an update from the Cuba Sikh Coalition that these defectors had occupied the space. So we made our way down there, and then within an hour, there was about 25 of our people protesting outside of the consulate. The consulate was under heavy police presence. There was at least, I would say, 8 to 12 cops there. And within the building, there was about 7 different staffers, most notably one person who arrived there late and was escorted in by the police. He changed into a military uniform and posed for photographs around the embassy. So they're obviously doing this. I don't think the consulate in Venezuela has a lot of strategic importance to the opposition right now as a physical location, but I think they're using it as a staging ground for propaganda that they're disseminating on social media. And unfortunately, our American media, the dutiful stenographers of power, are buying into it uncritically. So there was some press there that night, but mostly Spanish-speaking press, still largely unsympathetic to our cause. We protested around the consulate for about, I would say, 3 or 4 hours. At certain points, you could tell that the people occupying the space were sort of worried. They thought they could just march in here, no questions asked, and it wouldn't be much of a problem. So if you went across the street, you could see them kind of like pacing around nervously on their phones on the second floor, which I got a kick out of. So then they finally get out after about 4 hours, and the cops kind of usher them across the street, down the street into an Uber. And right around that time, serendipitously, People's Monday, the Shut It Down crew, had made it down from Midtown down to up to where we were, and we kind of marched them off the block. So that was a good thing. That was a good thing. It's clear that that alone is not going to deter them, though, unfortunately, because the next day they had a press conference outside the consulate at noon, and from what we understand, they had an entirely new rotating crew of traitors and capitalist bloodsuckers there. So Yeah, gusanos. So there was no repeats from the night before, which indicates that whoever is staging this stunt has enough resources that they can have like a rotating staff around this this event, this like occupation. It's a publicity stunt or whatever. And what's really important to note is that what they did last night was on Monday was a clear violation of international law. It was a clear, utter violation of international law, but they have nothing but contempt for international law, and the cops escorted them in like an illegal. What if any of us, especially us black and brown folk here, if we tried to pull that same kind of stunt, who knows what could have happened to us? But they were escorted in and out the whole night by these pigs, and we can't expect any better from them, but it was still just kind of shocking to see people breaking the law under police escort. But there was the press conference the day afterwards at noon. They basically led some sympathetic Western press. I'm pretty sure Time Magazine was there, and they kind of took them around the consulate. And again, they pointed to all the disrepair in the building that was largely their own creation, and they said, look what these socialists do. You can't give them anything nice. They just destroy everything. And then they shut down. What was interesting is they're not in the consulate full time. Like at nights, they're definitely turning the lights off, locking it up, and leaving. Because the next day, there was a small presence of people there, because we've been sending a couple people there or getting report backs from people every day since, just to get an idea of how many people are operating and what kind of resources we're working against. But today, for instance, when I went to the consulate around, I would say 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the afternoon, there was nobody there. It was completely locked and shuttered. Lights were off. So it's clear they're using this as a staging ground for their propaganda, and this is a new front they're trying to open up domestically here. They're also, I couldn't tell you the exact reasoning. I think because we've kind of staved them off and they weren't expecting so much pushback from the streets, they're trying to create this like false opposition domestically that's entirely like paid for and undersigned by the State Department, because they also did this same stunt down in D.C. In the consulate there. So it's not just going on in New York, but it's really important, therefore, that tomorrow we, regardless of the weather, we show up outside the consulate at 4 o'clock. From 4 to 10 o'clock, we have an event planned where we're basically going to try and make their lives as miserable as possible and make them regret the day they decided to spit in the face of the Bolivarian Revolution. So, thanks.
Thank you, Poppy. So before we move on to a couple of announcements about upcoming events, we are going to pass around the hat, and this is for donations because we are a self-funded organization and we need to raise money to cover the cost of rent and the food that you guys are eating and also all of the equipment that we're using. So if you could donate anything, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm not sure who has it. It's back there. It will come around. So thank you guys for that. So some upcoming events that we have going on. This Saturday from 1 to 2 p.m., there is going to be a Pro Libertad demonstration for Ana Belén Montes and Nina Droz. And this is going to be on 125th Street and Adam Clayton Powell. So if you could attend that, that would be great. There are 3 other ones. This Saturday also at 4 p.m., and this is happening at the Solidarity Center, which is here. We're going to have something for Sandra Bland, and this is a Say Her Name screening. On Wednesday, March 27th at 9 a.m., there is going to be a rally at 2 Broadway, and this is to honor the mother, Malaysia Goodson, before the MTA board meeting, who passed away. And there's also the 4 or 5 trains to Bowling Green. And then also the last one is to honor well, not to honor, to recognize the 20th anniversary of the U.S. bombing of Yugoslavia. And this is an IAC event in front of the UN, and this is at Ralph Bunche Park on 1st Avenue and 43rd Street. This will be taking place on Saturday, March 24th from 2 to 4 p.m. Oh, sorry, that's a typo here. Sunday, thank you for correcting me. Sunday on the 25th then, is that correct? The 24th is Sunday, from 2 to 4 p.m. All right. And now I'm going to pass it over to Nate, and he's going to give us an update on the Saturday, March 30th march, which is happening in D.C. So, Nate, please come up.
It's fine. Good evening, everyone. So I'm up here today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going to be happening in Washington, D.C. a week from Saturday, March 30th. There's going to be a demonstration under the slogan, "No to NATO, hands off Venezuela." And this is in response to a meeting of the NATO foreign ministers beginning a few days later in D.C. The demonstration is going to take up obviously the situation in Venezuela, because that is right now the most recent, most hot-burning imperialist crisis. The connection with NATO is really important, as Trump has just yesterday talked about Brazil becoming a NATO ally, and Colombia has taken on a stronger and stronger, closer relationship with NATO. So we see here how NATO is a tool for U.S. imperialism to extend its reach across the globe, and now it's making that move into South America. So it's really important for us to be there a week from this Saturday, Lafayette Park, 1 to 5 p.m., to say no to NATO, hands off Venezuela. There's going to be a bus organized from the Solidarity Center Saturday, both there and back. If you are interested in attending, please speak to me during or after the meeting, or with the sign-up sheet that's going around, put something next to your name, like bus. Is that sign-up sheet still going around? Where is that? Does anybody have the sign-up sheet? Yeah, let's really make sure it works its whole way up and down through the meeting. Just a little bit more about the demonstration. This demonstration is being organized by a wide coalition of groups in the anti-war movement in the United States, United National Anti-War Coalition, International Action Center, Black Alliance for Peace, Code Pink. So it's really a broad section of the anti-war left. And so that's a really exciting thing to see, and it's important for us to have a large presence from New York to complement the presence from people all over the country. And, we've got one bus right now that's filling up really quick, almost full, and we're working on getting a second bus from somewhere else. I think it would be incredible if we had 3 buses from New York City going down there. So let's really think about that. Get that name out there. People can call the Solidarity Center here to get tickets as well. They can speak to me, and there's also an online way to register that I can provide to anyone here. I'm trying to think if there's much else to add about the demonstration. Maybe just that it's really important after the kind of propaganda stunts that are being pulled at the consulate, because these are acts of desperation. They're trying to find a way to give the impression of more support than they actually have. And doing a little media stunt at a closed, abandoned consulate building is a way to do that. So a week from Saturday is an opportunity for us to strike back and show what the real balance of forces is. And of course, Sara later today is going to be talking more about what the balance of forces is in Venezuela. So I think that's it. Again, speak to me, or you can call the office or mark on the sign-up sheet if you're interested in going, or if you're interested in donating funds to allow people who are not able to purchase a bus ticket to go. That's also very important and something we're working on. So thank you so much for your time, and solidarity. Hands off Venezuela.
Thank you, Nate. So lastly, we are going to have a report back from the anti-war delegation to Venezuela. And we recently had a delegation organized by the U.S. Peace Council and led by Ajamu Baraka from the Black Alliance for Peace. So I'm going to invite Sara Flounders up here, who is the coordinator of the International Action Center, to give us a report back. Thank you.
Greetings. Just listening to the reports before me, it's clear that both we never rest and the U.S. war machine never rests. It's always scheming and planning, and every country in the world is in its crosshairs, and every gain for any population in the world is immediately a threat to global corporate domination. That's the way they see it. They don't see this as an advance for humanity. It's like, uh-oh, there's more people having a role, a decision-making. That's a threat. Now, Venezuela has done so much to alleviate enormous poverty, advance education, build health care for millions who were just ignored in the past by U.S.-friendly regimes. And it's their accomplishments that have made them an arch enemy of U.S. imperialism. That's why they're being targeted. Of course, they're also targeted because they have the largest oil and gold reserves in the world and a lot of other very valuable resources. And of course, U.S. imperialism wants their hands on that. They want to have the control of it. So it was a real honor and an opportunity to participate in this delegation to Venezuela. It was organized by the U.S. Peace Council, and our host was COSI, which is the Committee of International Solidarity in Venezuela. Excuse me, I came back with quite a cold. Now, I've been active more than 50 years in movements for revolutionary change here in the U.S., the belly of the beast, as we call it. And I've also been on solidarity delegations to countries in the midst of U.S. wars and strangulating sanctions and shortages and cuts in Iraq, in Gaza, horrendous conditions, where you could also see organized human resistance. In Syria and in Yugoslavia during U.S. bombing and massive destruction of everything that had been built. What's always the first thing targeted are the schools and the health clinics. And then potable water. Now, in Venezuela, I want to say I saw the most radical solutions to every one of the very real problems of U.S. imperialism that they just pile on when they're determined to bring a country down. And it means that countries and struggles learn from each other, learn new ways of resisting, and also they learn the script and what they can and should expect. They've learned the importance of mobilizations that hold the population together, because always the aim in U.S. wars is, they know any of these countries are no military threat, so they're not trying to take out any military equipment. The aim is to create trauma. It's psychological warfare. So what I saw in terms of resistance made me very optimistic about Venezuela's ability to resist. They know what they're up against. It's people power that changes history. Mobilized people power it's a material force. We should be confident of that. People power, when it's mobilized, has the ability to push back the aggressive hand of U.S. imperialism. Now, when I was there, I had an opportunity to participate in one of these huge demonstrations. They've been taking place every Saturday since the U.S. attempted coup, every single Saturday in tens of thousands. And that's not the first time. That's throughout the 20-year history of the Bolivarian Revolution. Again and again, people come out in these giant mobilizations that just fill the avenues, and it's hundreds and hundreds of buses and people organized by their unions and their schools and their colectivos. It's really quite an incredible thing to see. There's also an awareness that any strike by the U.S., any further war, has the real risk of opening a struggle throughout Latin America. Venezuela is not alone, and we should know this. But this demonstration and the enthusiasm and the number of groups, and because we had been in the news, we were sort of, I don't know, mini celebrities for a day, so everyone wanted to run up and take pictures with the, delegation from the U.S. that was against the U.S. war. It's kind of nice to be that popular once, Doesn't happen often. And at the same time, we went right after the meeting with President Maduro to something that was just fascinating. There was a friendly people's occupation going on in front of the presidential palace. And again, it was thousands of people, and they come out for all day and into the night. And each time it's a different union or school or collectivo, and it's all incredibly organized. When we were there, and it's because of the coup. They're making a big show of support. When we were there, it was the Oil Workers Union that was out in force. And the president of the Oil Workers Union, he got up on the stage and he said, "We want to say we are armed and we will defend what's ours. So come on." I mean, he was really confrontational. And a lot of illusions also, and the militias are there in force. Venezuela has more than a 2.5 million community organized militia. That's different from the armed forces, which are also big, but these are community organized militias. And everywhere, in every discussion, it would be always where we're seeking collective versus individual solutions. That individual solutions, that is rooted in capitalism. If we're trying to build and go toward socialism, we have to find for everything the collective solution. Now, our delegation, by the way, arrived late because American Airlines had shut down all travel. They're the main carrier to Venezuela, shut down all travel to Venezuela. Some folks, it took them a couple days to arrive. And also, the attack on the electric grid had just happened. There was no power anywhere in Venezuela, so planes couldn't even land at night. They had to, because there weren't any landing lights, literally. So they had to wait for the next day. So we were all late in arriving. Now, this attack on the electric grid, let me just say something about it, because the entire country went dark. And no electricity means no water is pumping. That means you can't flush your toilet. There's no water for cooking, for drinking, bathing. It means the metro isn't operating. Communication is down. It means gas pumps don't work. Credit card machines don't work. Elevators don't work. There are lots of high rises in Caracas. And this was true in the whole country. And during this, there was really cynical laughter from the opposition forces. And here's a former CIA director, he's now the Secretary of State, Pompeo, who's tweeting, "No food, no medicine, now no power, next, no Maduro." But that's not what happened. See, on the one hand, they actually took credit for what is a war crime, to shut off the electricity for the entire country. And that puts lives at risk in hospitals, oxygen tanks, dialysis. Just think of all that happens. People stuck in elevators, stuck in the metro. It really makes life very difficult immediately. And they're cheering about it. And the opposition is cheering about it. Now, just as a phony humanitarian delivery of food and supplies at the border, remember on February 23rd when they were going to break in with all this supplies? We were on Wall Street. There were demonstrations all over. And the idea then was that this would split the military in Venezuela. And it didn't happen. The military didn't break, and the people's militia sure didn't. So their next idea was this total darkness of the power grid would lead to rebellions, looting, chaos, a complete breakdown in society. And they actually printed news articles before it happened that that's what was happening. It's not what happened. Now, we know here in the U.S., New York City, in L.A., tens of thousands of people who in their gut understand deeply that their lives and their futures are stolen will take an opportunity, if the power goes out, to take back a fraction of what's stolen. That's a fact. The lights go out, things will be chaotic. In Venezuela, it was the opposite. It was overwhelmingly orderly for 5 and into 7 days of this as the power winked off and on. There were lines for water, for emergency supplies, or water tanks and trucks that went around. But the complete chaos, which their plan was that would be the first step into this intervention they want to do, didn't happen. And being there and seeing this, and seeing literally how orderly it was quite an accomplishment in its own right. Now, getting the power back on, it's sort of amazing it did take place in 5 to 7 days. I think about it, in Puerto Rico, it's almost a year just to get power back in many isolated areas. So to have electricity back in the whole country, it was, they later described in some detail, caused by a failure in the hydroelectric plant known as El Guri, and then cyber attacks, and then explosions at substations. It was a very calculated thing. There was even an article in Fortune, which is called The Capitalist Tool, Fortune magazine, describing exactly how they would organize such an attack. The U.S. is to blame in another way, not only for that attack, but for years of denying the equipment to upgrade the system. And that's an important thing, too. Now, I want to say something on the sanctions, because the sanctions are, Venezuelans say that they have the harshest sanctions of any country in the world, and the largest in sheer number that are regulating and strangling everything, blocking all banking services, all credit cards, all sale of oil, they have large gold reserves. They can't buy things around the world in gold. They can't use the SWIFT banking system. Any country that sells to Venezuela has problems with U.S. banking and so on. And all of this is to restrict the government's ability to provide the most basic needs. So it takes a lot of creative solutions to survive U.S. sanctions. Was also in Venezuela what made cash almost irrelevant. There was more than 3,000% hyperinflation. It did create financial chaos, which, along with the assassinations and the provocations, were an enormous everyday problem to deal with. On the other hand, there's 20 years of coping in Venezuela with coups and sanctions and a lot of other things. In many ways, and it was like a laughing joke, we watched actually program after program, Juan Guaido is really the joke of the country. That here is this completely insignificant, almost unknown politician who gets up and declares himself president of the country and is immediately recognized by the U.S. and every one of the countries in their sphere, which is, I think, 53 countries have now, all the NATO countries, all the imperialist allies, and a lot of other countries that are just dependent countries that aren't able to stand up. But out of 180, 86, 89 countries, that's still not significant, but it's the countries that wield imperialist power. So it's a real problem. If anyone gets up and is immediately recognized, no election, no laws, not based on anything, And on top of this, it's not only recognition, it's handing to this insignificant, reactionary, racist, backward politician the entire resources and assets of Venezuela. I mean, $11 billion in assets, and Citgo and Chevron, you know, all the. So it's not just political recognition. At the same time, what was happening was Elliot Abrams was appointed the special representative for Venezuela by ex-CIA Director, Secretary of State Pompeo. And it's important to know who Abrams is, because throughout the years of the war in Central America and the plannings for the Iraq War, he was the #1 guy in terms of really vicious war plans, and willing to use the most, death squads and mercenaries very openly and brag about it, write about it. They and Trump again and again pose this as part of the global struggle against socialism. We should know how they see it. This is how they see it. And this is why they're determined to stop Venezuela. It's a direct threat on Cuba. It's a threat on every progressive gain in Latin America. And it's sending a message, as Trump said, right here. Now, how long am I talking? Personally, I want to say the most interesting visit, since I'm a gardener, was to the Ministry of Urban Agriculture. Madeline Arias is the director of this, and we visited with her and her staff for a whole afternoon. She said we're the only country in the world to have a whole government ministry that's focused on quickly developing urban agriculture. And what it is totally organic gardens that this year alone will produce 25% of Venezuela's food needs. That's quite an accomplishment. And they're using backyards and empty lots and small greenhouses. They have it, the half acre produces this, and 1 acre that, and rooftop this, and empty lot of 3 acres this, and what can be planted, and what kind of seeds, and what rotation, and 100% organic, because, of course, fertilizers and pesticides and all that are cut off in the sanctions, plus they're not healthy. Using these urban gardens also cuts out the black market and the distribution and the shipping and the storage. And as they say, Venezuela has the climate and the ability to produce 3 and 4 crops a year. So this is really possible to do without huge problems of storage. It will be, as I say, 100% organic, and within the next few years, they expect it'll provide 50% of all their needs. And we said, well, where is the experience on this? They said, well, we're getting special advice and assistance from Cuban, Vietnamese, and Korean experts. Small agricultural solutions on how to deal with near-famine conditions created by U.S. sanctions and wars. So that's the kind of assistance. When I say they're learning and drawing on, they're also developing fish farms, and we were talking to them, they already had 260 large fish ponds that are good for fertilizer and protein, of course. There's more planned. There's a lot of effort being put into rabbit raising. And the barrio that we visited had plans for every family to raise rabbits because it's easy and clean and it provides high protein, and you can feed rabbits vegetable scraps, and everyone knows that rabbits reproduce very easily. About 8 to 10 litters a year and 8 to 12 bunnies in a litter, that's... You can solve a lot of problems with the bunnies. And there are other larger local farming efforts also that'll be fully organic, with having to do with chickens and cattle and pigs and whatnot. But especially the purpose of this ministry is to teach healthy eating and healthy habits to the young. They said we went from being a country of huge malnutrition to a country facing obesity. You can't just give out inexpensive food to lots of people. They need to learn the eating that's healthiest for them. So by increasing vastly the fruit and the vegetables that are available, and there's all kinds of cooking classes and all kinds of other things like that. And the idea is every neighborhood, this is why I say it really empowers people, that they won't starve in the event of war, in the event of things becoming worse, that they can provide for themselves and their children, and this is all being organized on a collective basis. So it reinforces, it's all organized by the collectives, even deciding where the farms are set up, and every group of 200 families can organize itself and apply directly to the government and get these packages and advice. So it encourages collective action. Now, humans also need more than veggies and fruit and meats. So that's where the clap boxes come in. What the U.S. sanctions have been able to do is create crises by withholding whatever product people need you suddenly couldn't buy. I mean, there was at one time a complete scarcity of toilet paper. You couldn't purchase it anywhere. It was hidden away in warehouses. Another time it's coffee, and another time it's sugar. And so this creates real stresses in the population. So they began a program, and it is distributed to 6 million families. Now, 6 million families is about more than 2/3 of the population. You get either biweekly, and other places monthly, a box of 19 to 20 basic supplies. That includes corn and milk and coffee and cans of tuna fish and powdered milk, salt, shampoo, soap, personal hygiene products, essential paper products, beans, cooking oil, flour, rice, all kinds of things that are needed. And it's distributed, again, through the community councils, which is a really all-out effort to cut down on the corruption when it was handled through food distribution and warehouses that the upper classes have their hands on, and they would hoard and sell and put on the black market and whatnot. So the fact that everyone has these basic food supplies is a big, big step in both support for the government and people's confidence among themselves, and again, strengthening these units of collective. So even our hosts in COSI, all of them, they all rely on these food boxes. Let me say something about the community councils. From the earliest days of the Bolivarian Revolution, what were formerly really around Caracas or every big city, and this is true everywhere in the world, there's a city center, and then there are huge urban areas where there's just no plumbing, no sanitation, barely electricity, really shanty towns, favelas, barrios that where nothing is working, and the housing is outrageous, and there aren't schools and whatnot. So the biggest accomplishment was in all of these neighborhoods, putting in roads and storm drains and electricity and plumbing and painting of houses and rooftops. I mean, the basic things. We visited two of the barrios where, to us at least, it certainly looked like there was 100% support for the whole revolutionary process. For example, Katia, which is on the hills to the west of Caracas. Now, this isn't just a small district. 1.5 million people live in Katia. We visited their community gardens and rabbit breeding program and met with the community council, saw where the militia trained. There is also another neighborhood called the February 23rd neighborhood. And that's where President Hugo Chavez, really the revolutionary leader of Venezuela, is buried in a sort of a fort overlooking the January 23rd neighborhood. Now, the community councils decide all the development in these neighborhoods, and they're the ones who meet with the government on what kind of plumbing, what sort of lighting, what's needed in the area. And as I said, a community council is a group of about 200 families. They apply for government recognition, and direct government aid is distributed through them. And then 8 to 10 community councils form a commune. Now, a commune, people are elected at each level, and it really is an effort at a stronger and different form of participatory democracy than what we know in bourgeois democracy. And it really creates a functioning popular power base of a network throughout the whole country that is involved in immediate problem solving, kind of energizes the whole population, and they see this as really a contribution. And in earlier time, this is something that even Marx described in the Paris Commune. I mean, it's not like this is the first experience in this, but it's very highly developed in Venezuela. And the commune represents not only the community councils, but also represented in the communes and elected and deciding of the decision-making in a commune is the militia and the unions and organizations of the disabled and women's organizations, LGBTQ organizations. This is really all represented in each of the communes, and there are about 500 communes around the country. And that was really the force behind the Constituent Assembly. And they're in all the poor and all the working class communities. And they're actually the biggest break against all the efforts to create chaos and utilize internal sabotage and create rumor mongering. It's always the community councils that step in and meet with people and explain what's going on. Let me say also something I found really impressive was on housing, and I must have asked them to repeat it about 6 times, even different people we met with. Is this really the number? But since 2016, so this is in the last 3 years, three maybe beginning 4 years ago, the Maduro government, this is an initiative of President Maduro, they've built 2.5 million new housing units all over the country. That's huge. It means new housing, a housing unit is, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, depending on the size of the family. So it's new housing for almost a third of the population. It's not just in Caracas, all over the country. There are entire new cities and new towns that have been built. And every housing complex comes with surrounding services of schools, daycare centers, medical clinics, bakeries, groceries, cafes, playgrounds, transportation, community gardens, and other such things. Now, 2.5 million housing units. Think about that. In the U.S. today, total in terms of low-income housing is just over 1 million housing units. There's hardly any low-income housing that's been built in about 40 years in the U.S. And yet, certainly, the possibilities are there. The very fact that Venezuela could build 2.5 million housing units and all of the other services around it is quite an accomplishment. It was also a huge jobs program at a time when there was every effort to shut down the economy. And instead, people were building their own homes, their own new communities, and they're very popular. there's also another program that's building like community centers all over, both in the older neighborhoods and in the new areas. And the community centers are the same everywhere, but they have sports, all sorts of sports and gym and workout facilities and art and theater, and then community meeting rooms. And we said, well, could the opposition meet in a meeting room here? They said, meeting rooms are for everybody. We said, really? Would they meet? They said, oh yeah. Then their children come to the sports programs and and the other programs. So there's an effort to also use a lot of political persuasion. And they have what's called it's like a sub-ministry of peace, which is trying to cool out and calm things and cut what has been, and we've seen its impact in Honduras and Mexico, with the infusion of drugs and despair and demoralization of large number of gangs. We know it here, we know it everywhere in the capitalist world, but this is something that they're also very actively thinking about and coping with in Venezuela. Now, let me wind up. I want to leave a lot of time for discussion. The Ministry of Health was probably the most sobering of the visits because such an effort had been put into building health clinics, training doctors, medical technicians of all kinds, and really ensuring medical care for everyone. And the sanctions are absolutely calculated now at cutting off. Venezuela receives less than 20% of essential medicines. Essential medicines. That means medicines for diabetes, epilepsy, cardiovascular, the most essential medicines are now extremely hard to get. And they said it's a real problem because you can have a doctor and a clinic. It doesn't mean you have the diagnostic equipment. It doesn't mean you can provide essential medicines. Now, a lot of this, and this is where international solidarity comes in, are now, because it's created a real shortage and a crisis, are now coming in from China, Russia, from other countries, from Iran, very determined to, in every way, help Venezuela. But there's always that point of dislocation. Because as I said, look, we were a rich country. We have huge reserves. We have money all over the world. We're selling oil and gold. We can buy these medicines, except we're not allowed to. Even through the World Health Organization, where it's been fully approved, but the final step is run by somebody who's a Republican U.S. appointee. I want to say one other final word on finding radical solutions to real problems. Hyperinflation, 3,000%. What's the solution? There may be no solution to what, on a mega scale, the U.S. is doing, but here's what they had to do immediately. The metro is free. Buses are free. Gas is free for cars. Just food is all but free in these food deliveries. Electricity and water, there's no charge. Because it became impossible to charge for anything in the capitalist market, with it changing from almost the minute you would make a payment before it went through. So the only solution to keep a modern society running is just do away with the cash. So that was kind of exciting. I wanted to tell the People's MTA about free metros, free subways. Anyway, there's so much to report. We had almost a 2-hour meeting with President Maduro. This was very exciting for us. It was really a high point. And he really posed this. He said, look, this is a 200-year struggle between Monroe and Bolivar, between Western domination and our determination to be a sovereign nation. Except now, he said, as Trump tells us, as Pompeo tells us, it's socialism against capitalism. And that's true, too. So, And he described both the measures that they're taking, the shutdown of the electricity, their determination to repair it, and so on. So it's really, I'm going to wind up by saying that it's finding the most radical solutions to very real problems that we saw there. It gave us a great deal of confidence. We should just be aware that U.S. options are running out. They're using the same script as they become smaller on a world scale, that there are other countries that are determined to give aid and supplies and trade and to be with Venezuela. That's very important. And in Venezuela, they give enormous weight to international solidarity. Of course, material solidarity. But the fact that there were demonstrations around the world with Venezuela, as soon as we finished the meeting, Sara Martin, who's with Women Against Military Madness in Minneapolis, she said to President Maduro, "We're having a demonstration right now in Minneapolis. It's going on." And so when we went outside, he immediately sent, "Here's a tweet, here's a message to the people of Minneapolis who are here with us today." So it means that they placed just the greatest, they were excited, everyone, to hear about what's planned for March 30th, to hear about all the activities. I mean, this is really life and breath to a country under struggle. So we should just be aware of that. The balance of forces in many, many ways is changing on a world scale. The struggle is very difficult. Venezuela is absolutely in the front line, but not defeated, determinately resisting, and we stand with them.
Thank you so much, Sara, for those updates, and thank you for all of the work that you've done. So now we are going to open it up for some questions and discussion. If anyone wants to start that, someone will be able to answer your questions. Do we have a microphone to pass around?
I could use a volunteer that would run this around the room.
Does anyone want to volunteer to run the microphone? Okay, thank you, Richard.
Hang on a second.
Okay, so who wants to go first? Yeah, please.
Oh, jeez. I think so.
All right, so we have someone here who wants to start. There.
I just wanted to say I'm 87 years old, and I grew up in the 30s in the Depression. And I grew up in a section called Brownsville in Brooklyn, which was an immigrant section where the poverty was enormous. Where I just remember, just to give you a sense, if you played in the streets, there was always furniture on the street because people were dispossessed. And to hear this educational of what is being done for the people in Venezuela, it's mind-boggling. To not to be afraid of being hungry, to have enough, all of those things that are distributed. If you come from a background of anybody else here does, when the poverty and or if you go to the immigrant communities now and how they must be treated. For example, go to any of the immigrant communities and you tell them these kind of stories, they would think you're nuts. How could that be? I just want, the impact is enormous.
All right. I think behind you, Richard.
Thank you very much. Question to Ms. Flounders. First of all, thank her very much for her presentation. But also, in speaking to people, I've been circulating petition, collecting signatures for, no to war on Venezuela. A number of people said, "Oh no, Maduro is corrupt. People don't like him." I'd like to know Ms. Flounders' opinion on that.
I'll take a few questions.
Just to add a little bit about Venezuela, I'm a musician, and I know that in Venezuela there was a fantastic program still going on called Metoda, right? And that's basically, they provide instruments for everybody, every child, and every school has a symphony orchestra. And today's music director of the Los Angeles Philharmonic is actually the product of the Sistema, you know, Dudamel, you know, a great conductor actually who conducts all over the world. So that's another, you know, contribution, the cultural, that Venezuela actually is unique actually in that respect. I want to invite everybody this Sunday, 2 p.m. in front of the UN. We will have a rally to mark 20 years of the bombing of my country, Yugoslavia. And, you know, times changed, you know, the people, Serbian people and other Yugoslav people in New York City are a little bit demoralized. I don't think that this will be a big rally, but it's important that it happens. And we will have a couple of speakers and also a couple of Serbian and other Yugoslav speakers. So this is 2 o'clock. We actually plan to march with signs starting 1 p.m. On Sunday from 8th Avenue and 24th Street towards 42nd Street and then turn. So we'll have a couple of signs about that. And to end, I'd like to say Serbia is under occupation, Kosovo is under occupation, and yet, you know, under this tremendous pressure from the West, Serbian government strongly supports President Maduro and Venezuela. So they are the only one from the former Yugoslavia that don't want to join NATO, and there is still some hope in my country. Thank you.
Peace. My question is dealing with, we actually were supposed, my name is Brother Shep, by the way. I'm an original Panther and with the Universal Zulu Nation. And we were supposed to do a Hip Hop for Humanity tour originally in Venezuela. Situation is we're going to do Cuba instead later this year. But my question is, it was set up basically through the Afro-Venezuelan network with Brother Chucho. And my question is, what's the situation with the indigenous populations and the traditional African, Afro-Venezuelan communities there?
Okay. Is that Sue?
I just wondered, because you didn't mention it too much, and I'm sure that they are playing a great role. I wonder, Sara, if you could talk about Cuba's role, either in terms of the medical or any other role in which they're giving aid.
Assalamu alaikum. Hi. Hi. Okay. Hi everybody. My name is Shahid Kamred and I'm a Secretary General Pakistan USA Freedom Forum. Thank you very much, Sara. Even you are feeling sick and due to the weather change and planes, but thanks a lot for your report. I think this kind of reports give us, every activist, to know how the occupied and the colonialists work and how you can defend your country, just like my country, Pakistan, which is at this moment under attack by the US allies, India, and bigger than us, no doubt. But we will never, Sara, raise our voice against the occupation of Palestine and Kashmir and Venezuela. Western governments have embargo on Cuba more than 50 years. Now they pick another allies which has a lot of resources of the oil. So we have to learn to every country's leader who love the sovereignty of the country how to defend. And the best thing is this, Sara, to make a friends, reach out to the friends, I don't know what's the Mr. Maduro plan to reach out to the other Muslim countries who's basically under attack by the Western and the Israeli occupation. So thank you very much, Sara. And the last thing, Pakistan USA Freedom Forum, we condemned Mr. Trump to accepting Golan Heights as illegal. This is a shame, and we should have to take a stand. It's a slap on the conscience of the world, and we condemned it. Occupied, Golan is occupied by the Israel. It should be go to the Syria. Thanks a lot.
Do we have any last questions?
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm with the Greens. Whoa, hold on. Hello? Okay, let's not forget that the U.S. imperialism is also expanding NATO's role, as you said, in Brazil and Colombia. And let's keep that in mind. I'm a big supporter of Ajamu Baraka. He was also vice president candidate for the Greens. And I'm in solidarity with the IAC and all the efforts to protect Venezuela and all anti-imperialist movements.
Thank you. Sorry, Sarah. I forget.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Sara for this report that gave us a picture of how things are really happening in Venezuela. I think what you said bodes well for their fight against U.S. imperialism and, of course, Trump and the people who support him. In addition, I think it's important to take note that countries in the world are seeing how rotten U.S. imperialism is and how they're trying to stop Venezuela from developing a socialist society in their country. But Sara's report definitely bodes well for the Venezuelan people who are fighting and determined for self-determination in their country. And this is really important. As important as that is, I think everybody in this room should be giving serious thought to how we in the U.S. support the Venezuelan people in their struggle against U.S. imperialism. And I want to raise the demonstration from March 30th in Washington, D.C. And everybody in this room should be giving serious consideration to going to that demonstration and to help building it, not only here in New York, but across the country. So it says a big get back to U.S. imperialism. So I wish the best for the Venezuelan people from the point of view of continuing their struggle and us helping to build worldwide struggle and solidarity with them.
Yes, on the right over here.
Sara, could you speak to the progressive role that the union plays in supporting the struggle in Venezuela, as well as the education system? How is it, education and the union in support of the struggle against imperialism?
Any last questions from anyone?
We can take another round.
Yeah, we can take another round after.
I understand that Venezuela was among less than 10 countries in the world to forbid GMO products, and that apparently the aid that was forced in from Colombia was GMO stuff. How did that play out?
Anyone else? Okay. If not, oh yes, one more over here.
Wait for the microphone, and we have one person.
Oh, Fatima, yeah. Oh.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'd just like to welcome Sara and all the comrades back from their trip. I'm glad you returned safely. And And I'm happy to hear about the report back also, that the situation is not as, well, I shouldn't say that, but it's better than what's reported in the mainstream media. Also, I'd like to invite everybody to a rally. It's a rally, it's United Against Islamophobia and Bigotry and Racism and Xenophobia, and it's also on Sunday, March 24. So I'm not trying to compete here, but it's from 2:30 to, I believe, 2:30 to 6 p.m., and it's at Times Square, Sunday, March 24. So I will try to make it to both rallies if I can. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, my name is Joe Hirsch, and I'm a member of Veterans for Peace. And I would like to announce a My Lai Memorial exhibit, a memorial to the victims of the American War. The exhibit creates a sacred space where participants encounter a troubling and painful look at U.S. behavior in Vietnam during the American War. It also goes for it basically should be called the Indochina War. It is. It was. The exhibit is welcoming, open, and non-judgmental. Participants are invited to process and share the difficult history in their own way and to engage in a unique and powerful sculptural collage process leading to dialogue as they share their artwork with other participants and on social media. Now, this is a 3-day event. Starts tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, and again, it competes with Sunday. It ends around 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Among other things, there will be a panel of people speaking about their experiences in Vietnam. There'll be 2 films shown. One is the Winter Soldier investigation, where veterans in 1971 in Detroit, Michigan, talked about their experiences, their war crimes in Indochina. Also, there's a film called Sir, No Sir, which is an indictment of the U.S. military. It's really, both films are powerful. And so I invite you, and it's at the Quaker Meeting House, 15 Rutherford Place, and that is between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, I believe. 16th Street. Thank you, Renee. No, Manhattan. This is in Manhattan. This is in Manhattan. And it starts at 7 o'clock. Now, Vets for Peace will be participating in setup, and of course, some of us will be giving testimony about their experiences. And briefly, I went to Vietnam after 50 years having been there. And I went to the My Lai the 50th anniversary of the massacre. And of course, this massacre killed 504 people, but there were scores of massacres in Indochina. That's the most important thing. And it was quite emotional. I can't. It'll be in the exhibit, so I invite everybody to come. It's a 3-day event. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some leaflets here. So
There's like 5 hands. You want to take all of them?
Sorry, I just want to motivate again for the action tomorrow. Can I see a show of hands in the room who can make it out to 51st Street at 4 o'clock tomorrow? 4 o'clock tomorrow. We're getting there. Can we see a show of hands of people who can be there at 6 o'clock tomorrow? Maybe once you're off work. How about 7 o'clock tomorrow? 8 o'clock tomorrow? We're looking to get as many people as possible out to the 51st Street Venezuelan consulate because right now we are trying to stand in solidarity with everybody in Venezuela, especially the diplomatic corps who have had their sovereignty so like disgustingly affronted against right now. So I just do want to remind everybody, if you can, go to the No War on Venezuela Facebook page right now on your phones. There is there's an event there for the thing tomorrow at 4 o'clock. If you could hit share, if you could promote that in your feed, we need to get a critical mass of people out there, because honestly, it's important to show solidarity. It's also worth noting that because this is a publicly announced event, that the right wingers are going to come as well. So we need to have the more people who are there, the safer we're all going to be. So please just consider it. If you can't make it, please tell people in your networks to make it. Share the event as widely as possible, and keep an eye on social media, because we will be reporting live from there tomorrow, regardless of the weather. Thank you again so much for the wonderful report back. Solidarity with you and your health. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then after Sara answers the first round of questions, we will take another round of questions.
Thank you.
Fabian.
My name is Fabian Velez. I just want to say hasta la victoria siempre.
Thank you.
That was very much the chant, Victoria Popular. The first question was asked about how do we handle the charges about Maduro is corrupt. The U.S. has never targeted any country without first going through the most incredible, vicious, calculated, endless stories of demonization. Suddenly, there can be an electoral process that jumped through 25 hoops and had 2,000 election inspectors, and Venezuela had thousands of inspectors. And whoever is a president is a dictator, and a corrupt dictator, and a bloodthirsty dictator, and everything else. So there's no way you can ever answer their charges. The best way to know that a country is really targeted is suddenly you learn who here knows almost any world leader, but you know Saddam Hussein, and you know Assad in Syria, and you know Gaddafi in Libya. You know Milosevic in Yugoslavia. So it's the same thing with Chavez and now Maduro in Venezuela. There's an elaborate electoral process. And the other part of it is there is a really entrenched and large and based on privilege and based on racism in Venezuela, a reactionary upper class and middle class that are firmly with the U.S. and completely against this process. I mean, you'll see a huge number of wall paintings for Maduro, for the revolution, but you'll also see muerte colectivos, death to the collectives. And they'll be referred to as thugs and criminals and gangs and whatnot, all the media here. So demonization is a real weapon of war, and it's so relentless in every form of media that its effort is to just alienate and quiet any kind of support. He's overwhelmingly popular. I mean, just 2.5 million housing units, and food for two-thirds, three-quarters of the population would go a long way. But also really popular measures like that. Okay, the next point on what Milos said about Sunday and it being the 20th anniversary. U.S. war in Yugoslavia. Now, this was a figure from them, not from Yugoslavia. They bombed 438 schools and 14 tanks. See, that's got to tell you what they're really aiming at when they fight a war. And the reason for hitting almost every school in the country was it's not only where children learn, but it's a community center. It's also the library and the meeting room and the gym and everything else. It's an effort to demoralize the population. And so saying we don't forget that war and being in solidarity, there's a very important conference in Belgrade this weekend, also marking it. So making that connection to wars is very important. Taking note at the same time of the political climate, and I'm glad Fatima raised Sunday is also the rally against xenophobia and Muslim attacks on Muslims. And it really is a rally in response to that horrendous massacre in New Zealand. But that massacre didn't happen alone. It's absolutely part of the climate in this country and around the world that is being whipped up in order to justify wars in the Middle East. So first, demonize Muslim people. So let's try to pay attention to both events. To Brother Shep's comment, the Afro-Brazilians, the way this is posed again and again is that the U.S. war and the U.S. sanctions are really a war against black and brown people, are a racist war, that the overwhelming majority of the Venezuelan population are people Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Venezuelan, indigenous people, but of course the upper class and the wealthy are overwhelmingly white. And that division, you really see it in the neighborhoods, you see it in the barrios, you see it in who the opposition spokespeople are, and the way the media used to be, the way the media is now. So it's very much a part of the way the struggle is seen and the racist character of the opposition. And that was also true when there were the opposition demonstrations. They actually grabbed and lynched. I mean, they killed simply black workers who were going to the wealthiest neighborhoods. There were people who were burned alive by these opposition mobs. So their political character, we got to really know who they are. Now, there also are folks in the Venezuelan opposition who aspire to having money and position and prestige. You know, not everybody is with the revolutionary process. That's a fact. I mean, just to be reasonable about this and to have a real honest evaluation and view. But it's overwhelmingly popular. But there is always that struggle between collective and individual action. And there are folks who want to come here. There was a sales clerk who spoke to me and said, well, I want to go to the U.S. because I want to become rich. I said, you have money now? No. I said, well, if you come to the U.S. as an immigrant, what conditions do you think you'll face? Said, I'll get rich. Oh, all right. But that's the illusion. That's the illusion. And it shapes the consciousness of people and blots out the reality around them. The question about Cuba's role from the very first day was so vital in this. In Venezuela actually learning the relationship between Fidel and Chavez is something that Chavez always described. This really gave him a view of what he was facing and how to rally the population. And it's also been true in just thousands of doctors, medical technicians, and technicians of every kind who have gone to Venezuela, who've gone all over the world. Cuban doctors, there are more Cuban doctors in Africa than the World Health Organization. You know, so Cuban solidarity is just extraordinary. Actually, Cuban doctors run the entire health system in Haiti today. You know, this is really the reality. On the GMO products being outlawed, that's true. Even before the urban agriculture, Venezuela had outlawed GMO products, and that's one more reason big ag, business, corporate ag business in the U.S. particularly hates them. What was the first thing that happened with NAFTA in Mexico. We shouldn't forget this. It just overnight wiped out millions of Venezuelan small peasants as huge amounts of corn from the U.S. was just shipped in at rock bottom prices. So now, one other thing. See, there are huge developments that are happening on a world scale that are going to get away from the U.S. no matter what they do. Look at this uprising in Algeria. I mean, there's tens of millions of people in the streets. There are things that the U.S. and their war plans can't plan about. There are eruptions that come from below. And there will be eruptions in response to their wars. So these are the kind of things we should have real confidence in, the power of people in motion to just change the complete plan that the U.S. thinks that they have carefully blocked out, and that they can just threaten and everyone will again bow down and go back to the way things were. So we should just look to extraordinary things that are happening, like what's going on right now in Algeria. But we should also know that we look for and live for that potential right here, that you can't just drive down conditions here further and further and further and not expect that there'll be a real response. I'm sorry, there was a question also on the unions. The unions are extremely powerful in Venezuela, and all the workers are organized into all different kinds of unions, and where it's small workplaces, that's where the colectivos come in. Also, it's a very important that the workers are organized, and there are all kinds also of union delegations to Venezuela that have been there in the past, and delegations that are planned going forward in the future, because there's a lot to learn from the process, and the Venezuelan unions are very excited to host delegations of workers from the U.S. and other delegations all around the world.
Thank you, Sara. Okay, so we're going to take a second round of questions if anyone has any that they did not get to ask before. Anyone? Yes, we have one in the back. If we could pass the mic back there.
While we're passing it back.
Hello, you could hear me now. Yes, I was just very pleased to hear your remarks about the GMO. When I first heard that the British refused to have U.S. agricultural products, I immediately connected that with the fact that the Venezuelans refused to have U.S. agricultural products, and you have underlined my connection by saying that the initial position of the Venezuelans before those agricultural products, Trojan horse, may I say, were attempts to force down the throats of the Venezuelans. The Venezuelans objected to having GMOs. They objected to having their population poisoned, in other words. And may I say that you spoke of the Haitian Revolution, the Algerian Revolution, also the Haitian uprising is coming, and there are other uprisings, I understand, going around the world. Capitalism is on its way out. We can never say when, but bye-bye and let the door hit you as you leave.
Anyone else for questions or comments?
Hello, I am from the People's MTA, and I was really heartened to hear that in Venezuela, transportation is free. I mean, here we're fighting for elevators. There they have free gasoline, free transit, free bus lines. It's wonderful, and we have such a long way to go. I wanted to announce that on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., we're having a demonstration in front of the MTA headquarters in honor of Malaysia Goodson, the woman who fell to her death in the subway stairs a few weeks ago. We're having a sidewalk demonstration, and we would love to have a lot of women in particular come, because we want to it's International Women's Month. So we want to have a women's presence to show our support for Malaysia and her family. Now her cousin is going to be there and is going to speak, both in front of the building on the sidewalk demonstration and inside to the MTA. And when we contacted her, she told Tony Murphy that she was looking for a way to say something, to get back, to tell the MTA that they're responsible for the death of her cousin. And so it's going to be a very important demonstration, and I urge everyone who can to please come. I have leaflets, and I'll give them out as people leave. Thank you.
I do. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but there was a proposal set forth by the administration to the Congress for $500 million going to an initial military invasion of Venezuela. What are ways that American public citizens can, if they can't make it to DC, what are ways that people can organize to protest tax-based money being used to invade countries, in ways that we have absolutely no business being involved?
Okay, let me answer those, and I don't want to keep everybody here too long. Other ways to help is first of all, donate to these buses going to D.C. This is a big operation to organize to get, lots and lots of people to Washington. There's also buses going from Jersey, from Newark, from Boston, with the Boston Bus Drivers Union. Maduro was very excited about that because Maduro is a former bus driver. So he said, I want to drive that bus to Washington. Can I do that? But obviously he can't do that. But at any rate, that bus from Boston going to Washington is going to have a big picture on it of Maduro driving the bus. So do get back on those concretes tonight of actually committing to being on the bus, donating toward it, and helping spread the word. Or if you can't go, helping other people go, because the subsidized tickets are very important. Take part in the demonstration tomorrow. It's 4 to 10 o'clock, so it means you can go for an hour or you can go for 6, but go there for at least a little while. And there are a lot of other events like that taking place. Just another report back that there's going to be a call on Tuesday night where the whole delegation will give comments and reports. I think it's a Zoom call. You register online. It'll also be recorded. This was a fascinating delegation. There was a Black Alliance for Peace, Veterans for Peace, organized by the Peace Council. Also folks from Critical Resistance and Women Against Military Madness and a number of other organizations, community-based organizations. So they're all saying a few words. There's going to be a press conference at the UN. I think tonight Critical Resistance in D.C., Baltimore was also doing their report back. So in a lot of different ways, the purpose of a delegation like this is to talk about it, for people to give their impressions, and I think everyone on that delegation are going to be doing a lot of different meetings. There's something in New York coming up at the National Writers Union, I think, in a couple of weeks. So there are a number of other events in different cities to really give a view of what's happening in Venezuela. But the most important thing is to be in the streets to defend Venezuela and to make the link to NATO, because that isn't just a happening. And the U.S. war in Yugoslavia was really about the expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe, into the Balkans, right up to the borders of Russia. It's a reason they needed a war in order to do that. The NATO plan is definitely to expand into Latin America. They need a war in order to do that. And it's a very dangerous time, which we should take very, very seriously. And I just hope this is like high on everyone's agenda. Thank you.
We have an announcement from Brother Ship. Hold on.
Yeah, real quick. I don't have a date yet, but in terms of at the last meeting, we talked about different things that could be done, and I completed my homework assignment, by the way. There's 53 nations now. I'm not sure if I got all 53 yet, but after we come back on the 30th, we're going to begin hitting these missions in this city that are supporting Trump and the rest of these fools in their war against the Southern Hemisphere. So make sure you sign the sign-in sheet that's here so you can get that information. We're looking at targeting Brazil first. And one thing about Brazil, we just heard from that meeting that idiot had, the two idiots, presidents. They're planning on building a space station in Brazil. Yes. And not only are they going to build it there, but they're targeting the Quilembos. Okay, people don't know what the Quilembos are. Those are the traditional African communities in Brazil that resisted slavery and that were there. This is where they're going to move on, them and the indigenous populations, to build these bases in Brazil. So we're going to hit Brazil, and we're going to hit Jamaica too on that same day. The way things are split up, both of them are in the same building. Okay, so everything's been split up so that we can simultaneously hit 4 or maybe 5 missions at one time that are supporting this war against Venezuela. So stay tuned. We're going to definitely pull out the black and brown communities in the city. So we're looking for our allies to please join us when we start hitting these missions, because we need to let our people in these countries know that we don't support the United States government's moves against the Southern Hemisphere. All power to people.
Thank you. Okay, one more in the back, and then I think we're going to close this out.
Sara, I know that you were paying attention. I know you have known you for years, and I know you were paying attention to and what the women are doing in Venezuela. And I know that they couldn't have a traditional International Women's Day march because they were busy the women workers, busy defending the Bolivarian Revolution and their country and their government. And I know also that women workers, agricultural, industrial, poor women, have made a lot of gains under the Bolivarian Revolution, under Chavez and under Maduro too. And I'm sure because of that they are in the forefront of defending the revolution. So I wanted to ask you about that, because Workers' World newspaper is doing, a global roundup of International Women's Day, and I think it's very important to include that women workers in Venezuela are defending their revolution.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good way to describe the first day of the power outage hitting and shutting down the entire country was International Women's Day. So that impacted many things. But really in Venezuela, the gains for women have been pretty incredible. And it's even part of the laws now that even in terms of deciding candidates on the community councils, it has to be half men, half women from every political party. So it's a problem for the right-wing parties. It's a big problem. If they're going to propose a whole slate and they try to get around it, and they don't have the people, they try to put up, anyway. This has become a real quandary for them, but it's seen as a real gain in terms of the revolution. And we also, when we met with this electoral body, I asked, well, would transgender people be how would they be represented? They said, well, we've actually had 3 examples where people originally had registered to run under one name, and then they asked to be relisted under their chosen gender. So, I mean, it just shows in many ways that they're rethinking everything about representation, about gender, and about how to make real challenges in the way things are done. And they're acutely aware of this, as is the population as a whole. I mean, these were actually, it's all women who were on the Electoral Commission, so they're the enforcers.
All right, with that, I think we're going to end this. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Sara, for answering those questions. Please, if you can, come to the consulate tomorrow. As Taryn said before, the more numbers that we have, the better off we're going to be. And thank you all again. The struggle continues.